And I think this is one of the things that I want to advocate for with the society, is that the importance of valuing our history, valuing our stories, but not just that, but systematically documenting it. Arts organizations, cultural organizations to invest not only in events, but also invest in strategy, right? What are the actual goals? What are we actually moving towards, and have such clarity around that? I think when you have clarity, then it enables you to have conversations from a different place. And then when there's overlap, then I think strong collaborations and partnerships could happen, you know.
So I'm here today with Jesse Ryan, Juno-nominated composer and saxophonist. You're also the leader of Kaiso Street Collective.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing with Kaiso Street Collective?
So the Kaiso Street Collective was launched in February 2023 as part of Black History Month sort of like offerings. And the producer of the premiere was Joy Bullen. Shout out to Joy Bullen. And so she has this sort of series that she does every year where she finds, Black artists. Most of them that I've seen in the past have been Caribbean, have some kind of Caribbean heritage. And she assists in the production and the funding, right? Because usually projects that are sort of aspirational and you need some kind of backing to be able to do it, right? So she worked with her to do that. And I had been sort of thinking about this project at least a year before that. And basically, so my grandfather is the mighty bomber, Calypsonian from Trinidad and Tobago. And he passed away on January 1st, 2022. And so when he passed away, I sat down and I wrote this proposal about a project that I could, do that would sort of honor him and also Calypso traditions. And when the opportunity came to work with Joy, I thought, this is the perfect opportunity to sort of launch this project. So I put together a group of some of my favorite musicians, jazz musicians in the city. And it's 9 of us. It's a nonette. And so what we do is
what?
nonette.
What's that?
9 people playing music together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, within the jazz tradition, there's sort of a tradition of like nonette music, 9 musicians. So it was also part of like my master's program. I'm doing a master's in music composition right now. And I thought, okay, it would be a cool way to sort of write for a larger ensemble. And so the purpose of the group is to celebrate Calypso tradition, specifically from like the golden era of Calypso. So anything from like 1920s all the way up to this 70s, maybe 80s too. But yeah, so we choose one Calypsonian, we take their work and we reimagine it through the lens of this sort of like modern jazz ensemble. And it's really inspired by the work of the SF Jazz Collective, who is the San Francisco Jazz Collective. So yeah, that's in the process of doing research into my grandfather's music, also like the historic and cultural context of the music and all of that, I was realizing that there was this huge gap in terms of things being documented well. It was so hard to do the research because most of it is really documented in the newspapers and through the songs of the Calypsonians. And then there are some, academics that have done like ethnomusicology work, but it was still hard to get my hands on some of that information. And then there's like no listening libraries really. There's the old stuff is so hard to find. So anyway, so in the process of preparing for this premiere, that led me to create the Kaiso Street Society, which is the organization that the Kaiso Street Collective is now a part of.
Okay. Yeah. I like what you were saying about it's so hard to kind of find this stuff, because that's the reason why I started this podcast too, is because I have so many questions that I wanted answers to, particularly as it relates to Jab Carnival traditions in Grenada specifically, because I'm like, what's the truth and where do I find it?
Right.
And I'm sure that's kind of maybe something similar that you were thinking with Calypso and trying to find the music.
Absolutely. So a bit of my history is that I didn't really grow up around Calypso. So I grew up in the Pentecostal church in a very Christian household. And but I knew my grandfather, the Calypsonian. The first time I heard him actually perform though was on television, and I was like around 13 years old, right? So when I fell in love with music and jazz, and I was surrounded by some, local jazz musicians in Trinidad who were really pioneers of like the Kaiso jazz, Calypso jazz kind of genre. And so they kind of put a seed in my ear and in my heart for like, finding, ancestral DNA through the music and all of that. And so when I went to the States to Berkeley to study, I kind of went on this journey of learning jazz, this new music that I fell in love with when in my sort of like mid-teens, but also trying to look back at like, what's my own history, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned Grenada. My grandfather, Mighty Bowman, is from Grenada.
Oh,
right?
nice.
So yeah, it's been just sort of this journey of trying to find, as you mentioned, the truth, trying to find ancestral DNA through the music. But I think it's important to note that when I was growing up, even when I started to get into music, it was hard to get like mentorship because there was gatekeeping a lot. People didn't want to share
still
information.
A thing.
Yeah. And I can't even blame them because I think they also experienced the gatekeeping, right? So it's just like this generational thing of gatekeeping. And so it was tough. And a lot of my artistic pursuits over the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years has been focused on Afro-Caribbean musical traditions and doing research.
So what exactly is Kaiso? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so Kaiso is, I've heard, different origins of the word, but Kaiso is the phrase that they would use in the calendar and like the stick fighting. So it's a word that cheers on the fighters to go on.
Oh, cool.
Right? So when the Calypso traditions were developing, they actually started to use the word to cheer on calypsonians as well. And so the word Kaiso became synonymous with Calypso. So Kaiso is Calypso. And so for those of you listening who have no idea what Calypso is, I mean, it's kind of hard to think that you don't know what Calypso is. But so Calypso is at its core protest music. And it was the voice of people who didn't have a voice. It came out of the slave experience in Trinidad and Tobago and really Carnival traditions. So the slaves, they would mimic the French masters. And that led to the development of griots. The griots were the men most time that would sing, and so that tradition developed into calypso music, and they used that tradition to talk about current issues. Many times it was about the unfair treatment by the colonial masters, about the state of affairs sometimes, and then also world issues, right? So it was really like the poor man's newspaper. And so, yeah, that's what I know at its core Calypso is. In around the 1950s, once Calypso in the 1930s rather, a bunch of calypsonians got the opportunity to travel to New York to record calypsos. And so post-World War as well, Calypso was kind of going worldwide. And I think it was around the 50s, 60s that I think Calypso got a little bit corrupted. But we'll talk about it if we get a chance to. That's another conversation.
Let's talk about it now, because that was going to be the next thing I was going to ask you.
Okay.
Yeah, because I remember in our conversation you were talking about how something happened when it went to the States and.
Yeah. So I'll preface what I'm going to say by saying that I had the opportunity to speak at York University just a month ago. And the context was the work I'm doing with the Kaiso Street Society. So Calypso is known worldwide as this, lighthearted, upbeat, and even frivolous music, right? But as I mentioned earlier, Calypso is really protest music. And I think the notion of it being simple, sort of rural music came from, it started sort of brewed during the 1950s, the Calypso craze. So there was a Calypso craze that happened in the 1950s where Calypso became really popular. It was in movies, it was in all the nightclubs in the US. And I didn't know this till I started to do the research, right? At one point there were articles that would talk about Calypso taking over rock and roll in the 50s as like the popular music. And so obviously that didn't happen. But so you had prominent calypsonians like probably the most prominent one around the world is Harry Belafonte, right? Mm-hmm. However, his heritage is Jamaican, right? And the album was a tribute to his own Jamaican heritage. It had nothing to do with Trinidad and Tobago, right? And on that album, he actually records one of my grandfather's calypsos, right? It's called Gloria. And his popularity, I think, really helped to propel calypso internationally. But I also think that it also helped to share some misconceptions about what calypso actually is. Mm-hmm. And so people think that it's when people think about the calypso, they think about Harry Belafonte. But he was actually, I don't want to use the word appropriating, but I think there is a level of appropriation when it comes to like the originations of the music itself, right? And I think he himself was responsible in terms of giving the artists that he covered their songs, like giving them credit. Mm-hmm. And you can go online.
Explain what you mean by he appropriated it, like in your ideas.
Yeah, I mean, so he had his own Caribbean heritage. So I'm being careful when I say appropriated, but mm-hmm. I think because of how popular he became, mm-hmm. people associated Calypso with Harry Belafonte. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they didn't think about the people's songs that he was covering, right?
So he wasn't writing his own?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
I don't think don't quote me on it, but I don't think he ever wrote, his own calypso. He was either doing covers or singing like folk songs.
Okay.
So, and there's a bunch of, there's all the politics with records and all of that, I think affected, why he rose to popularity as opposed mm-hmm. to other people. Mm-hmm. He was also really good friends with Martin Luther King.
Oh.
So the civil rights movement in the 1960s, Harry Belafonte would perform at some of the rallies. Mm. There's pictures of Martin Luther King and Harry Belafonte like right beside him in some of these major rallies. So he helped fund the civil rights movement, some of the campaigns, and he also bailed Martin Luther King out of prison a couple of times.
So this Calypso history is running real deep.
Right? So Calypso was actually really juxtaposed to the civil rights movement through the work of Harry Belafonte. So I'm being careful about how I say this because I think he did really significant and important and positive work around Calypso. Mm-hmm. But I think there's also a backside to this story where his overshadowing popularity really casted a shadow on the originators of the music. And the Calypso craze, I think, helped to create an appetite for Calypso that wasn't true to the original intent of Calypso. People thought about Trinidad as this tourist destination with sun, sand, and sea, and you can go have a good time, and it's sexy music. But it's protest music that was formed like in an urban area of in the capital in Laventille and Belmont, Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, and it's really about the struggle of the people.
Nice. Yeah. And what to ask you, because I think it's very interesting to hear you talk about how Calypso music was connected to, the civil rights movement in the States in a capacity. I've never heard that before.
I didn't make the connection either until I was working on this Kaiso Street Collective project, and I did a gig leading up to that with the incredible piano player from Grenada.
Nice.
Eddie Bullen in Toronto. And he mentioned, and I was like, oh shoot, I never made that connection. So and that's one of the challenges, right? And that's why I think the work of the Kaiso Street Society is super important, because so much of the history has not been documented well, and in the ad hoc ways that it has been documented, there's no hub to access that information.
So is that something that you guys are working on, creating that listening library and
absolutely. So if I were to just kind of describe what the organization is going to do, we're working on preserving, celebrating Calypso traditions. we're highlighting its connection to the jazz tradition, because that's another thing that, we forget. A lot of the calypso musicians were also jazz musicians.
Oh, wow.
Right? And there was this crossover of sharing of information. Calypsonians in the 1930s went to New York, which is like the hub of, of jazz.
Yeah.
And so we also want to reframe Calypso's global narrative as music for social change, right? We know that there's a party element. We know that it's fun music, and I think at the heart of most like black music created in the New World, there's this element of like just juxtaposing the feel good element with like deeper, serious themes, right? So if you think of like R&B, like original R&B, or like the blues, it all feels good. And if you don't listen to the lyrics, you'll have a good time. But when you listen to the lyrics, it's kind of like hinting at deeper stories. So it's music for social change. We're trying to create a hub for Calypso artists, Calypso researchers, and educators, and fans around the world. And three main activities would be research, presentation of Calypso with the Kaiso Street Collective. We're working on a Kaiso Street big band as well. That'll be kind of like a legacy ensemble that would take the old arrangements and perform them as is. Like, if you think of like, R&B, pop, hip hop, there's tons of cover bands.
Yeah.
That,
I recently saw somebody cover Outcast Elevators in like a symphony.
No way.
Yeah, it sounded amazing. I was like, yo, this sounds so good. So is it like you guys would be covering old Calypso?
Yeah, we'd be covering old Calypsos. One of the things that people ask, when I talk about the IJ is that, or actually I was talking to a guy on Instagram. He's like, is it like only old stuff you're doing? And so I can get the sense of people like, like there's new stuff too. We want to hear some soca, but I really think Calypso is timeless. And it's also a genre that, I don't know, it's like this, it's kind of untapped in that if you look around the Afro-Caribbean diaspora, or even like in the States, all the styles of music that popped up, in the 19th century or even the 20th century, there's like generations of musicians taking that music and developing it. In Trinidad and around Calypso, not really. So there's literally decades of music to draw inspiration from and to do something with. So
what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, it just sounds like Kaiso Street Collective is like this past, present, future type thing.
Absolutely. Well, the collective is the ensemble.
Okay.
Right? The Kaiso Street Society, right, okay, is the organization. Yeah. So part of our vision is to be able to present Calypso to diverse audiences across oceans, or, and across generations as well. So
that's so cool. So what are maybe some of the initiatives that you guys have coming up, if any, or like, I don't know, some ideas that you have for the future? Because listen, if you say it on here, there might be somebody out there who can help you and say, oh, I know where to get this.
Absolutely. Well, I've been trying to be intentional with connecting with people in the city who are already experts in this. So the work of the society is to be a connector. Because one of the things that's happening, or that has been happening, is that Calypso and cultural organizations rarely ever collaborate and pool resources. I think there are 4 like main Calypso hubs like around the world. So there's Trinidad and Tobago, of course, there's Toronto, there's New York, and then there's London. Yeah. Right. So if you're out there and you want one of those places, hit me up. All right. But yeah, so in terms of initiatives, we're working on a lecture series, a curated lecture series, where we try to pair subject matter experts on Calypso with universities.
That is so cool.
To get them talking about the history, and the universities and colleges around the world, they have the infrastructure, they have the funding, and I think we're living in a time where the voices of Afro-Caribbean people and African people in general are being, prioritized, and we're being given the opportunity to step into spaces that otherwise we probably wouldn't have given opportunities. So I think the time is right to do things like that. I want to partner with those colleges to create a both literature and listening libraries around Calypso. There have been, graduate and doctoral students that have done research on Calypso, or just like musicologists. So we want to create a library where we know that we're going to have to partner with some sort of like tech innovator to figure out exactly what that would look like, whether it's on our end or whether it's a sort of online portal that gives you access to other universities' libraries. So that's one thing. The stories of Calypsonians have also been not been documented. So like biographical stories. The biographical stories of Calypsonians and their work overlap so much with like historical, cultural things. So it's not just their history, but it's also our history as a people. So I think that's important. And we want to in the process of doing that, we want to advocate for the value of like cultural artifacts, newspaper clippings.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard to do research, because a lot of times the research or the artifacts that we're looking for are in people's homes. And the government organizations and colleges actually haven't done a great job of, and I'm talking about like in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, of systematically documenting, systematically making it available to the youth and the next generation, systematically making it part of primary, secondary, tertiary education curriculum, right? I know that the University of Trinidad is doing some great work now. Now they have a Carnival Studies master's program and a Carnival, and a Carnival Studies undergrad program, and I think it runs the full gamut of like mass making, music, and on like entrepreneurship. I think and history as well. So that's on the research advocacy kind of realm. In terms of presentation, we want to have 3 ensembles, one of which already exists, the Kaiso Street Collective. We just applied for a first round of project grants, and we're just kind of waiting to hear back, hoping to record our first record next year, which will be the music of the Mighty Bomber. And we're working with what's his name? We're working with OCPA, which is the Calypso Association here, to program some shows next year, and in collaboration with the Kaiso Street Big Band. So it'll be mostly covers, and we'll feature some local Calypsonians in the city. And the third element, which is probably a little bit down the road, will be to form a youth ensemble that will work alongside. Yeah, absolutely, because it has to have an intergenerational element to work alongside with those the other ensembles. Yeah,
I love that so much. So you started this February 2022.
That's when we launched the Kaiso Street Collective. Yes, and I was doing research maybe like 3 months before that, just kind of preparing.
So you started mentally, you started the end of 2021.
Yeah,
but exactly. You have done so much in the process.
Well, that's kind of my nature. When I focus on something, I go I kind of get obsessed with it, and I go hard.
I know exactly what that's like. Yeah. I can agree with you. I'm the same way too. Yeah. But it's just so incredible to see how much you're doing, and being able to connect with post-secondary institutions and stuff like that. Yeah, how have you been able to do so much in such a short period of time?
Well, like I said, I get really absorbed in something, and I just kind of throw myself directly into it. I've had an incredible community of people that's kind of helping me connect with people that are the movers and shakers in the various corners of the community. So it's been a lot of conversations, reaching out to people and saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking, can we have a meeting? I think I've probably had at least, 15 to 20 meetings in the last 2 months with just different people here in Toronto, in Trinidad, just talking about the project, getting their advice. And shout out to all the people who have been doing amazing work in this space around Calypso and around just Carnival traditions, because I think those people are usually seen as insignificant, and they are really the unsung, heroes. Sometimes they just kind of focus on doing the work because they're just so ingrained in it and they love it. And so it's been kind of like relying on their expertise as well and asking questions. Shout out to King Cosmos. Yeah, so shout out to Henry Gomez, King Cosmos. He came to the show in February, and he kind of reminded me of my grandfather as well. He kind of really embraced me, and so we've had lots of great conversation. He's been a great support. Shout out to everybody else I've spoken to. It too many names to remember right now. To just basically consult. We have a bunch of advisors, and I've put together a team of partners and some volunteers as well. That's been helping me do some of the research and some of the administrative things to get the organization up and running. So the organization is, it's registered. It's a legit entity right now, and we're working on the strategic plan for the first 5 years. And I'm waiting on some project funding, and we have our soft launch on December 8th.
So for the research aspect of it, you have people helping you do the research, but what does actually doing the research look like?
So I can tell you what I've done, and then I can tell you what we're hoping to do in the future. So in terms of research, I have been collecting any and every article that I could find online relating to Calypso. And right now, it was on specific topics. So when I was researching my grandfather's stuff, it was just like anything related to him, anything on YouTube, any article anybody wrote. I downloaded, his library from, records online. Oh, and I have to mention that I've been working with the amazing researcher. So yeah, I've been working with the amazing Ray Funk. He lives in Alaska. And he's done so much work in this space. And he just actually received an award from the Trinidad and Tobago government on the work that he did on research. Some people in Toronto might know his name because he's done work with Caribana and interviewing folks.
How were you able to connect with him?
He actually reached out to me in February. I think somebody shared the poster of the event I was having in February. And he saw, it was related to my granddad. So he reached out to me. And then we jumped on a Zoom call, we started talking, and I shared the vision with him. And he actually was one of the first people that kind of really encouraged me to keep doing the work that I'm doing. So I've been working with him, both advising on the strategy for research, and then he's done so much research, he's been actually sending me stuff from his library of research. So yeah, relying on people like him. And I think I'm forgetting your question now. Just remind me.
No, I wanted to know what the research looks like.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's that. And I've just been trying to find everything I can online and just comparing things to see, okay, this overlaps, this makes sense. We would like to... the other thing I've been doing is reading just research papers. So a bunch of people have, wrote academic sort of publications on Calypso or specific topics for their master's or doctoral dissertations. And because I'm doing my master's program, I had access to some of those through my sort of school's library. And so yeah, I just kind of downloaded everything. I'm still kind of working my way through it, but yeah, so just that. We would like to partner with more students, masters and doctoral students, to sort of do some of the work. So basically, we would kind of create a topic.
I have a connection for you, I think.
Great.
Somebody reached out to me recently on Instagram. Shout out to the girl that reached out to me. She is part of OISE, U of T. That's their master's teacher program. Yeah. And they're going to be having some Black History Month coming up. She actually just asked me to kind of be a part of that. But
awesome.
They're focused on Caribbean connect, that kind of stuff. So
lovely.
I'll put that connect together because she's a master's student and she's a part of, I think it's a African Caribbean society at U of T. So cool. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The cool thing about this podcast is when we come, we have these conversations. There's ideas, there's connections, all these things that happen. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, the connection is important. I think we're living in a time where every time I have these conversations, there's a spark, and I can tell something is happening, right?
I agree.
So yeah,
I think it's a beautiful thing. Listen, it's God, and because absolutely. I said to you on the phone the other day, and when I said it, sometimes you say something, That was true.
Yeah.
When I said to you on the phone, I said, listen, every single one of us, we each have a puzzle piece
Yes.
in this thing.
Yes.
And we have to come together and put every single one of our pieces together so we can push forward for the culture and find out the history and then push forward. Because I think we're all getting to the point where it's like, okay, if we keep continuing on this path of not knowing, we're all just going to be lost.
I think that's important. So one of the things, and I think it has implications for both Afro-Caribbean people, but then also society at large. So when I was my very, very first sort of consultation, when I was forming this society, I put together a group of people that were either in education or in the arts sector that were related to, like, you know, the Afro-Caribbean community in some way. At least most of them were. And anyway, so one of the questions one of the persons on the meeting asked was, why? Like, what's the purpose and what is the benefit for society at large? Because to do this is going to take a significant amount of resources and funding to do it, right? And so funding institutions often want to know, what is the large-scale benefit of this project? Who is it going to benefit, right? So it kind of got me thinking about, you know, Calypso, its global impact as music for social change. And you mentioned just continuing not knowing, right? And I think this is one of the things that I want to advocate for with the society, is that the importance of valuing our history, valuing our stories, but not just that, but systematically documenting it. And for organizations, Calypso organizations, you know, arts organizations, cultural organizations, to invest not only in events, but also invest in strategy, right? What are the actual goals? What are we actually moving towards? And have such clarity around that. I think when you have clarity, then it enables you to have conversations from a different place. And then when there's overlap, then I think strong collaborations and partnerships could happen, you know.
And then there's so much alignment there that you just find your people.
Absolutely.
They reach out to you.
Absolutely.
The man from Alaska reached out to you. You reached out to me.
Yep.
And it's just this big energy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see, you know, the work that you guys will continue to do. I think in the future, eventually, I would love to have like an organization that partners with organizations like you. I know you said a lot of people don't collaborate. I'm 100% for collaboration, because the only way to move forward is together.
And the work is a lot bigger than me. So that's one of the things I was really aware of when I was starting this, is that I have familial connections to Calypso and I love Calypso and all of that. But the work is so much bigger than me that it'll only happen with partnerships, with collaborations, with not wanting to gatekeep, not wanting to control. I think that's another thing that really has plagued our community. Just like everybody, you know, wanting to get a piece of the pie for themselves and being willing to dismiss everybody else in the pursuit of that thing. You know, it happens both on an individual level, but also at an organizational level, you know.
And we see that too with like mask making. With one of the episodes that I had, one of the questions that somebody asked me, and I asked the person that I was interviewing, was like, do you feel like mask making, the tradition of mask making, is something that's gatekept? And she was like, yeah, like I actually do think it's gatekept. And it's a similar kind of like mentality where she's like, you know, this is the way that people kind of, you know, it's their bread and butter, it's how they make a living. So if they are to train people and teach them how to make masks, then it could be taking something away from them.
Yeah.
So kind of having that, like, I don't know, like, I guess you can call it a scarcity mentality, but when you look at it from a different perspective, it's like, if I'm able to, maybe I'm not going to teach the whole world, but if I just take on one person and show them the culture and show them the traditions, I know that it will continue. And it's not just about me making my money right now.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that the culture is preserved and not somebody going on YouTube or buying the bra on Fashion Nova. I don't know if you saw Fashion Nova had
stuff.
People were upset about that, and understandably.
But here's the thing, you can't get upset with Fashion Nova and other people. So, like, for example, with steel pan, one of the patents belongs to Japan.
Okay.
So there's this saying from somebody that's very well known, that I won't say the name, but some of you might know the saying. The saying is, opportunity lurks where responsibility is abdicated.
Meaning what?
So there's a couple ways to look at it. So the context that it's used is to, if you want to do great things in the world, first look around your immediate environment and see what you have ignored in your immediate environment and fix that first. Those are the first opportunities to fix something in the world, right? But I also think it could be used to express, we as a people have also abdicated some of our responsibilities to keep our traditions, preserve our traditions. And there's lots of systemic sort of factors that also have, led to that. But I think by and large, government organizations, cultural organizations have abdicated the responsibility, and as a people as well, right? So there's lots of opportunity for irresponsible, sort of appropriation from people who see, there's capital to be made here, right? So I have a sort of interesting perspective on what you just shared too. I was reading a research paper, and I can't remember the person who wrote the paper. She was researching dance traditions in Carriacou, Grenada. And she was talking about the idea of, we have a duality in the Caribbean, and I think she was also extending it to anybody who came from tradition of being colonized.
Yeah.
That we love our traditions, but at the same time, because we were taught to hate it, we also hate it at the same time.
Yeah.
And so there's this duality where we love it, but it's a weird connection to it. And I think what sometimes happens is that we see that sort of mentality trickle down in terms of how we gatekeep things, in terms of who we choose to embrace versus who we choose to push away. Because there is a sort of there is a colorism thing that also is pervasive in our society, in our community rather, where, people who don't look like me and you, but might be part of the community, their voices are sometimes, celebrated a lot more, right? And it's the colonial thing, and so I think there's all of this like decolonization, and I don't use that word lightly at all, right? That's kind of a buzzword right now, in North America and around the world. I grew up with such a different racial, lens, of intimate race relations. So I don't use racial terms, lightly at all. But my last trip home to Trinidad, I was noticing how much colonialism still exists on the island. And it's taken the form now from colonialism to classism, right? And elitism, if you line with certain people and if you have money and if you present a particular way, we'll elevate those voices as opposed to, and it's the same thing, it's just a different version of the same thing, Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. I don't even know where to start.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't even know if I'm, it's so like, it's such a multi-layered conversation.
Yeah, and it's deeply entrenched.
Absolutely. And yeah, so for me, it's something that I really dislike. It's something that I want to say I battle with it like mentally every day. Just like, how do we move past these things because it's so entrenched in us?
To the point where a lot of us don't even acknowledge it. We just think it's normal.
We think it's normal. Yeah. And it's hard to have the conversations around it because it's multi-layered, and a lot of times the conversations around race relations, colorism, colonization, all of that stuff, one person is talking about it on one level and the other person is talking on a different level. So you never really reach any conclusions, because I think if I'm talking to somebody one-on-one, that's one level of conversation. But if I'm talking about a systemic thing, that's a totally different conversation.
I think some of the ways that we see that happening too is like as it relates to Carnival. Like, I know one of the issues, and I don't know for sure, but just from what I've heard is that some of the locals are getting priced out of, well, maybe they're smaller bands, but I know that some of the locals are getting priced out of being able to participate in Carnival because of the cost of it. Another thing, in Trinidad specifically, maybe in other islands too, I'm sure, because a lot of the foreigners and people in the diaspora are coming and they're spending US dollars and things like that.
That's the elitism that I was just talking about.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And then another thing that I heard, I interviewed another guest, shout out to Carnival Bay. She was saying that, oh yeah, you know, some of the bands in Trinidad, like you have to send a photo of yourself to be able to play in the band. And I was like, what do you mean you have to send? I was like, so before they'll take your money, they have to see what you look. And I think that's just another way that the classism or elitism or like only people with a certain kind of could play in we band, like, you know, like
exactly that's exactly what it is. And it's sad, and there is a small subset of people that are benefiting from that, and other people are being left out of it. And I think this is why the work of this, not to, you know, to sell it, but this is why the work of what I want to do is so important.
Yeah.
Because what we're discussing right now only exists because we've actually forgotten the actual history of where the music comes from, how it was created, why it was created, and how, you know, there were riots when, you know, the first Carnival celebrations happened because the English colonialists didn't want it to happen. They were seeing how the music was helping the people form identity, and that identity gave them the ability to cooperate, and that cooperation led to resistance. Yeah. And so they wanted to shut it down. So it's the same sort of thing, just another version of it. And my hope is to be able to advocate for people to see, to first of all know the history, and then draw conclusions from the history and be able to do better, you know, and make more responsible choices. Some people are still going to do what they're going to do because it's putting money in their pocket. You know, it is what it is, but yeah.
And I think too, the more that we learn our history, although it can be difficult to find, it is incredibly empowering.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's incredibly empowering. It's just like, oh my gosh, so you mean this and that and that. So for example, one of the things that I learned was that when the drums were banned, it's because we used to send messages to each other and communicate with these drums. I had no idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, you know, I was sharing with you that my debut album, I feature tambourin music. So tambourin drums, you know, it's a small frame drum. It's like a tambourin, but it's like a tambourin, but there's no jingles on it. And so the instrument was formed out of the band that happened. So they couldn't play their, you know, African traditional drums anymore. So they created this small drum that would be easily concealable.
Wow.
So that they can still do what they're doing, but they can hide it quickly. So yeah. That's the history.
Is so cool. See, little things like that. There's no textbook for me to go to. The history of the entire Caribbean and your roots. It's like all this work that has to be done. And that's why I love having these conversations, because not only do I get to learn, but I get to share it with everybody else.
Absolutely.
You get to share what you know with the people. I get to ask questions, you know.
And I get to learn as well, because there's so much that I'm still learning.
Yeah.
And it's humbling and it's exciting at the same time.
And I think that's the thing too. The more that I have these conversations is the more that I realize that we're all still learning.
Absolutely.
There is no one expert on all of it. And again, none of it has really been documented like that. And what has been documented, and I think I talked about this in another episode. Actually, no, I was having a conversation. This is about it, like indigenous. Actually, no, in the Caribbean too. Apparently there was this white lady who went around to different like indigenous communities and throughout the Caribbean and stuff. And she recorded, I believe it was like the people's music and stuff like that. And she created like some sort of archive that she was able to make money off of. But all the people who played the music and stuff like that, they don't receive anything.
Right.
So I just wanted to share that, because I don't know, I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know who that lady is specifically, but there have been many ethnomusicologists, researchers that have come to the Caribbean and recorded. And under the I think some of them are probably well intended, just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
But because they did the work and they have these recorded assets and nobody signed off on it, now they had the opportunity to, profit off of it. There are some organizations that haven't necessarily made those recordings available like commercially, so they don't sell them, but they still have ownership of what is it? It's called because they own a big chunk of like the Calypso libraries, and those libraries were donated to them through various small record labels.
Smithsonian Folkways?
Smithsonian Folkways.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Smithsonian organization, they have a Smithsonian Folkways part of the organization that has a large listening library of folk music from all around the world. And so they own, some of the catalogs of smaller Calypso records. I recorded Calypso back in the day, some of whom were recording on like Cook Records. Roy Cook was one of the guys from New York. He actually recorded my grandfather as well. And so there's a couple others. The history of it is kind of, I don't know exactly, so I don't want to say.
But it's always kind of.
Yeah. So and it's because sometimes it's gatekeeping. Yeah. Sometimes it's somebody saw the opportunity to do it, and sometimes it's also just like poor management and poor planning.
What was the quote that you said about abdicate?
Yeah. So it's opportunity lurks where responsibility is abdicated. Abdicated, exactly.
And abdicated means
it means to not take responsibility, right? To not follow up on something, to discard something.
One of the things and I was having this conversation with Toronto Caribbean Carnival, but one of the like issues in the community is like this lack of ownership, right? So yeah, like even with these small things, it's like we don't own this title, we don't own this name, so somebody else can come and take it and make money off of it, you know, all these different things. But yeah, I think this has been such an interesting conversation. I think you've left us with like a lot to think about and even go research. Like I think I'm gonna go try to find like a Calypso. I'm gonna go look at this Smithsonian Folkways thing. I don't know if it's something that you have to pay for to.
No, you can. I think you can get a preview.
Okay.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think you can purchase it online. I think I said it's not available for commercial release, but if you want to have it, I think you can purchase tracks on there. I'm not sure exactly how they use the funds because I think they might be a non-profit organization. Okay. But yeah. Yeah,
so I'm really excited to see what Kaiso Street Society has in the future beyond, there's so much that you guys are doing. You're reimagining Calypso. You're creating or wanting to create the listening library, working with universities and post-secondary institutions, not only in the Caribbean, but also
around the world.
Right. Yeah. So I'm really excited to see what you guys do.
Me too.
I'm 100% a supporter, and I look forward to, one day being able to collaborate on something. I think it'll be incredible.
I'm confident that we will. Thank you so much for having me on, to talk about it.
Yeah. Where can people find you online?
So you can check my website. It's Jesse Ryan Music, muzik.com. On Instagram and all socials, YouTube, Facebook at Jesse Ryan Sax, JESSERYANSAX. I'm a saxophone player, and you can check out my music online as well.
Nice. And then where can we find Kaiso Street Society?
Yeah, so the website is going to be kaisostreetsociety.org. We're launching the website on the 8th of December.
Nice. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you
for joining.
Absolutely.